Grit Crusaders. I am Brooke Plack, your host here today on the Grit Crusade podcast, where we get real in the trenches of life, relationships, and business. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today. If it's your first time, welcome. You are in for a treat. We are in part 4 of a mini-series called Defense Mechanisms. So if you have not listened to the first 3 episodes, or 3 parts of the mini-series, maybe I should say, we'll be sure and link those in the show notes for you below. So, all right. So today I'm going to encourage you, like I have on the other parts of this mini-series, to not point the finger, but rather turn and look inward. And for both of these, they are definitely ones that I can find within me. So it's not hard at all to turn and look inward when we talk about these. So today's episode is also sponsored by the Space Co-working and Event Venue in downtown Benton. And the first 3 parts. So let's go over the first 3 parts of this mini-series in case you missed those or need a little bit of reminder like I do after a week. So part 1 covered displacement and intellectualization. And these could be positive or negative things, remember. Part 2, we talked about avoidance and denial. And part 3, we talked about projection and rationalization. And so these episodes don't necessarily build on each other. So listening to them in any order or whichever ones you feel called to is totally appropriate. No big deal. And so today's episode, we're going to explore, you ready? Humor and compartmentalization. I feel like I probably should have come up with like a big Laffy Taffy joke for humor because that would have been funny, but I didn't. Oh, I'll tell you my son's one. Are you ready? This is his favorite joke to tell. He's 5. All right. So why didn't the chicken cross the road? Because... There's your funny Laffy Taffy joke. I love it. All right. So we're going to talk about how humor and compartmentalization affect our growth, our leadership, and our journeys throughout life. So that resonates with almost all of us as we progress from, where we are to where we want to be. And before we get started, do want to ask you guys to go ahead and be sure and give this a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. As a new content creator, every kind of feedback you give us online helps us to build and grow our audience so we can impact more people. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast streaming platform, go ahead and subscribe to the show so that you can make sure you don't miss our weekly drops on Thursdays. So humor, first of all, I'm going to read the definition to us as a defense mechanism since I'm not a psychologist, but just a regular girl that's navigating life. All right. Humor as a defense mechanism is decreasing the anxiety associated with the situation by pointing out something funny or ironic about it. So again, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It's not always a bad thing. So you may tell a funny story about someone in a memorial service at their, after their death and help to bring light to a very painful situation. It's not necessarily an avoidance altogether of the emotion, but sometimes it's just like a reprieve or a brief relief from the emotion. And it's definitely one of the more positive defense mechanisms, and it can help us, survive hard times. And in fact, I think that the funniest people I know are the ones who have been through the most trauma, and they use their situations and their stories to help other people. Because again, the more we talk, the more we all talk. And humor does have a biochemical effect on our brain. So as we laugh, as we experience joy, if you were hooked up to a whole bunch of electrodes all over your body, it will show the rises of endorphin levels and brain activity and brain waves. And, it's actually one of the most attractive features, I think, about a person is their ability to, laugh at situations, to make others laugh, and just to experience that joy together. But we've all been in the meetings where people take it a little too far, or they make jokes at the expense of other people and like not having that self-awareness. So we're going to talk about the differences in positive humor and negative humor so we can make sure that we're not crossing those lines and having that self-awareness about ourselves. So there are 3 different types, according to Psych Central, of positive humor. So there's affiliative. I mean, I feel like if it's an English teacher, I should know how to say that word, but here we are. Affiliative or affiliative. Yeah, just Google that. Ask Siri. Maybe she'll pronounce it for you. And you can let me know if I'm pronouncing it right or wrong. So it's like a good, lighthearted, jolly humor where people tell funny stories or witty jokes. Like my husband's the wittiest person you've ever met. It's hilarious. And so it's like no offense. People find it funny. Positive reappraisal is when you are reframing or shifting your perspective of a situation and making it like something that's threatening to now it's a positive challenge. And then there's self-enhancing where you're laughing at your small failures or finding humor in the oddities of daily life. Like, can't believe I did that. Or, oh my God, what was I thinking? Or, those things. Like there are positive ways to frame stuff and to laugh at yourself. But there's also negative ones. So being around positive humor is uplifting. That's what changes the biochemicals in our brain. But then there's that humor that makes us all kind of like back up from it and cringe. And the two types of negative humor are self-defeating. So this is when you're making jokes about yourself, but like not in a like lighthearted, witty way, or aggressive humor where you're making jokes at the expense or teasing other people to make yourself feel better. Yeah. And unfortunately, those creep up into our lives and conversation. And I feel like it's important to mention here that regardless whether humor is like more positive or negative, there are significant cultural differences in what different cultures, countries, different parts of the United States and other areas that people find funny. So just because you find it funny doesn't mean that everyone else finds it funny. So when someone else is offended by something, you have to be able to communicate through that instead of just avoiding it or like denying that you had any part in it. Because it is how you grew up is not the same as how everyone else grew up. And the sooner we all realize that, the better we are off. And before we jump into the second half of our episode today, I want to take a minute to share a recent experience I had at our sponsor, the Space Co-working and Event Venue. So about 2 weeks ago, we had our nonprofit board meeting there for the Impact One Foundation, which is a nonprofit that I co-founded that helps raise money for kids to participate in sports and extracurricular activities. Impact1.org with an E. You can check it out there. But we had our board meeting in the green room. So it's one of the rooms at the Space Co-working venue. And it was just so relaxing. Like there's a Mountain Valley water filter system, a basket of snacks. There's an Apple TV hooked up to the TV so we could project up our agenda and our financials. They have Wi-Fi and a printer. And then I think we even had a board member that wasn't able to come to that board meeting. And they have this like secure shred basket so we could drop the financials and extra paperwork there and didn't have to worry about it getting like picked up by somebody else. Like not that we're trying to hide anything, but A, we don't want to leave trash, and B, when you have financials and things like that, you want to make sure, and kids' names on papers and stuff like that, that we're keeping that information protected as well. And so it's just so nice to have a spot like that in Central Arkansas. So if you're looking for a place to host a meeting or an event, be sure you check out www.coworkthespace.com. So before we jump back into the thick of defense mechanisms, we're going to do my favorite segment on the podcast, Trivia in the Trenches. I feel like that was like an extra animated introduction this time. So when I have a guest on the episode, I'm always sure to ask them the question. But when it's just you and I like today, then I get to ask you the question. And I kind of like today's question and answer because it's a little bit of drama that has nothing to do with me, which is my favorite kind of drama, right? All right, here we go. What does M&M stand for? Mars and Murray, like Murrie. So my first question was, who's Murray? Because everyone's heard of the Mars Company, right? Well, M stands for Mars and M stands for Murray, named after Forrest E. Mars Sr., which is the founder of the Mars Company, and Bruce Murray, you ready for the drama? The son of Hershey's chocolate president, William F.R. Murray. And so the story behind M&M's and how it came to be is when Mars had a fallout with his father and traveled to Europe. And then he goes to Europe, the war's happening, everyone's eating these chocolate pebbles, and he's like, oh, I need to bring it back to the U.S., but I'm not taking it to my dad because I don't like him, and we had a fallout, and we're not talking. So he goes to the rival family, the Hershey's. And so during World War II, Mars and Murray, M&M, made a deal with the government that got M&Ms placed in all the soldiers' bags. Dun dun. And the rest is history. Yay, trivia in the trenches. Okay, back for the show today. So the first half of the episode, we explored humor and how we use that as a defense mechanism, both positively and negatively. So it's not always a negative thing. The second one we're going to talk about today is compartmentalization, and I am a friggin' master, baby. Yes, I am. And so like one of my famous phrases I say is, that's not a problem for today. And honestly, it served me really well. So this is an example of how I can reduce the anxiety in my life by choosing to compartmentalize or move a problem to a different day. That's not something I need to solve right now. Now, if I never go back to it, that's when issues can come up and arise later. But being able to go back to that at the later date, and sometimes I'm like, that's on the agenda for next week. That's on the agenda for next month, right? It can't all be solved today. We can't solve all the world's problems in one day. And as someone who is naturally an extremely anxious person, that served me really well. However, there's still hard stuff to process, and we can't do that all the time. So when my mom committed suicide, September 25th, 2013, it was a Wednesday. And I remember the first thing I was thinking was, if I can just make it to Saturday. If I can just make it to Saturday. And I told myself over and over and over in my head. So this was pre-COVID. We live in the South. She's a white woman. Okay, I say that because culturally, how people and how fast people get buried, it's very different. So in the South, white woman, we can usually get a funeral taken care of in 3 to 4 days. Okay, I realize that's not the same everywhere, but that's how it goes here. So I knew in my brain, my defense mechanism was compartmentalizing and narrowing my focus of just get to Saturday. Don't think about the rest of your life without your mom. Don't think about the gun she put in her mouth. Don't think about all those things. Think about right now and what you need to do between today and Saturday. And it allowed me to get through that situation. Now, let me go on back and tell you that I spent a whole nother 6 or 7 years compartmentalizing that shiz. And it wasn't until I spent the time with a trauma therapist and doing grief recovery to get through that I was able to process all those emotions. So that was not a healthy way of me compartmentalizing at all. Okay. So by definition, compartmentalization is blocking out the awareness of some certain parts of your personality. It's similar to dissociation, but not as extreme, which means at some point you usually come back to it. Whereas dissociation and dissociative personality disorders like completely dissociate and get away from a situation, and they normally never come back to it. But what it causes, that compartmentalization, is if you act in a way that is inconsistent with your values, you may compartmentalize those actions and block it from your awareness. And it can be understood as separating parts of your life. So according to Insights Therapy Services, here are some examples that you may also be able to relate to. So a couple has decided to get a divorce. However, the holidays are coming up and they've decided to be together, family pictures, celebrate, do all the things. They know they're not staying married, but for right now, it's not time to reveal that information. Okay, maybe stress, you have a project at work with a coworker that you don't align with because they have a different sports team that they like, or they're of a different religion than you. Some people take that sports team stuff as serious as they take religion. And it rubs you the wrong way, but you just put that in the back of your brain because you know you got to get the project done. Again, it's not always unhealthy. Or you give yourself permission to manage your mental health needs regardless of the time of day. You're going to watch a show or read a book. How you going to watch a book, Gina? I guess maybe on your Kindle you're watching it as you swipe by. I don't know. So you're going to read a book, watch a book, or take a bath and let those thoughts leave you for right then. All healthy ways. But sometimes when you compartmentalize, you run the risk of being emotionally unavailable or disconnected. So you're not walking through that season of grief. And so you spend time playing video games. for hours upon hours and ignoring the needs of your family and those people that love you. Or maybe it could be, we're going to say this is someone else for this example, because I would hate for it to be you, but someone is sexually harassing women at work and they come home and they're an extremely loving parent to female daughters. Okay. Love is love. We should be the same person to the public as we are private. Maybe you've engaged in behaviors that are outside the norm. And for these purposes, we're going to talk about things that aren't illegal, because this could go down a huge rabbit hole, right? So let's say you really like stuffed animals. Okay. And you may be tempted to hide that from people because you're a grown adult. But then it creates a loss of impulse control. So figuring out, how can I reconcile my public self with my private self? Like, I see that quote on Facebook all the time. Like, the person you see at home, work, in the grocery store are all totally different. But why? Why are they different? Like, peace, harmony, and centeredness. So you have this core of energy that goes from your tailbone all the way up to your head, or some people call it your third eye. Okay. It runs along your spinal column. I don't think anyone's going to argue with me that nerves and neurons and energy come from our spinal column, okay? That harmony and that oneness and that centeredness cannot be achieved until we align who we are fully with our public and our private personas. So I don't get that quote, because at the end of the day, the stuff catches up with you. Like, you can only be fake for so long. So like compartmentalizing, humor, all of these defense mechanisms that we've talked about, most of them can serve us well in short seasons. But looking at the big picture, at the long-term effects of how they show up in our life, I feel like so many times we create busyness and other things to do so we don't have to walk through that hard. But then it can manifest in ways that are unhealthy, illegal, inappropriate, lead to harmful behaviors, lead to addictions, lead to avoidance, lead to overeating, lead to abuse, lead to all of these things. But it all starts with not dealing with what's right in front of us. So even though we might not be able to deal with it right now, we have to deal with it, or else. And so wrapping up this whole 4-part series on defense mechanisms and how they show up in our lives, here is the question I'm going to leave you with today. If you dealt with your hard, would that make you feel more free? And how bad do you want that? Because you got to want that more than you want all of these other things that we're making up excuses for. I hope you have enjoyed this mini series. I hope it's helped bring to light something in your life in ways that you can grow personally and individually, because I know it has for me. Because as I process this content with you guys, I am internalizing it and looking at my own self, because that's what we want to do. Except that one time I pointed out the thing about my husband, and I already know, and you could already make a comment about that. But we really want to try to internalize these things and start working on growing ourselves, because if we're all working on growing into our best selves, the world will be such a better, more accepting, and more loving place. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Grit Crusade podcast with Brooke Plack. Our theme song is Thunder City by Lunar Ray, licensed through Soundstripe. This podcast was produced by Luminate Media Group. Thank you for listening, and we will see you on the next episode.